Welcome to Training Transformers, brought to you by Kitabu. I'm your host Tejas, and this is where we dive deep into the evolving world of learning and development with the industry's most innovative minds. So, in each episode, we sit down with visionary L&D leaders and training leaders, and who are reshaping how organizations approach learning, development, knowledge transfer in a very rapidly changing digital ecosystem. So, from emerging technologies to proven methodologies, we explore the strategies and insights that are transforming workplace learning. Today, we have an expert of learning and development with us, the VP of Development and Growth Strategy at Aspen Sales, and also a very accomplished author and a speaker, and also the new president-elect of ATD 2025, Jenessa Jacobs. Welcome to the show, Jenessa.
Thank you so much for having me, Tejas.
Really glad to have you here. So, Jenessa, before we dive into this world of corporate learning, I'd love to hear what actually drew you to this intersection of people development and strategic growth. So, what's your story behind your journey in L&D?
I think I have a very similar story to many L&D professionals in the sense that I fell into L&D. So when I say fell into L&D, what does that mean? My first degree was in dance performance, actually, and theater. So that was not what I had planned on doing. And I had a contract that was up with the dance company I was working with. And I got what I would call a real job. Not saying that dance isn't a real job, but I got a real job as a medical coder and biller right as the ICD-10 switchover happened. So for those of you that aren't in healthcare, in the United States, there was a big switchover because of HIPAA that caused all these new codes to be generated specifically within our federal Medicare healthcare government. And so what happened is we started to identify trends of how things were denying. And then we started to identify how we could get claims approved for a lot of our oxygen using patients. So oxygen obviously is a life-saving treatment plan, right? And it caught the attention of the director of billing analytics. And he said, hey, could you write something on this and then teach it? And so I published 2 manuals for hospitals, doctors, DME companies, just all about Medicare denial codes and how we can change how we're charting in order to begin getting claims approved. So that's how I fell into L&D. And from there, we started to develop onboarding programs. We started to develop training. We built an entire team around it. And then we went out and we started helping others do the same thing. And it just expanded from there. We added automation, and I kind of worked myself out of my first job because of it. But we automated all of our processes and then found out, hey, this is actually something that a lot more individuals should be doing, and took off from there.
That is fascinating to hear how you started with the creative arts and then probably went into teaching something, and then now you've got into people development and strategy. So very interesting journey. It starts from creativity and it goes to education and teaching. Yeah. But what was it that really sparked your passion for it? I mean, was it like doing that first manual and thought, okay, I'm going to teach someone something and I'm really good at this, and probably let's get into this field then?
No, actually what I first fell in love with was some of the travel. They had me traveling Monday through Friday and then home on the weekends, but the people I got to meet, the individuals that had a heart where they just wanted to help and they wanted to make a difference, but all they were needing is just tools and resources. So being able to identify some of the current tools and resources that they had and teach and show them how to utilize those in order to maximize their processes, and watching, their hearts fill or their ability to then impact other individuals is really, really what filled my heart.
Sounds great. Sounds great. It's been a fascinating journey. So going now to a main topic of hybrid learning. I mean, it's fascinating how organizations right now are reinventing their learning spaces these days. I mean, in your work with maybe Aspen Space and beyond, you have probably seen some approaches to blending digital and traditional training. So, what are some of the most innovative ways that you have seen so far that companies are truly making hybrid learning work, not just as a necessity, but maybe as an advantage?
Yeah. So organizations that are really effectively using hybrid learning and really balancing that kind of digital with traditional in order to maximize their outcomes are doing a couple key things really well. The first one is recognizing appropriate use case. So, what do I mean by recognizing appropriate use case? There's three different types of learning. There's basic learning, there's intermediate learning, and there's advanced learning. When we look at it through the lens of the traditional and now the new kind of digital training deliveries, basic and initial exposure to information, oftentimes in the traditional setting, was done through observation. You would have an individual that would go in, observe someone doing it, and that's their first exposure to that type of learning. And we're finding now that in the digital learning space, we can recreate a lot of these observations through video, through PowerPoints, and through e-learning. So that reduces the cost. It saves the extra person, time, salary. It increases efficiency. It allows them to do it on an as-needed basis. And because there are no variables to basic information, this really should be digital. Now, when we get into intermediate learning, intermediate is where we begin to introduce a lot of these variables, and that's where the experience starts to come in. The user starts to try it. In traditional formats, this was done kind of with a buddy system or in a controlled environment through different role plays. And now we have technology, again, to reduce cost and even mitigate some risk in there, with AR, VR, e-learning simulations, and a lot of different ways to practice, much so the same way a buddy system would function. Difference is we can control the feedback. So recognizing that not everyone has access to these types of technologies, you can still utilize a mentor or buddy program. And this is where we see a lot of that blend as to maybe some of it's digital and some of it is traditional. Now, in advanced learning, this kind of goes beyond the exposure and the experience and into a space of experimentation. And this is where we're still seeing a lot of that traditional learning style and that academia. Oftentimes, you need a thought partner to ask insightful questions to and understand unintended consequences or impacts of the bigger picture there. However, now with a lot of AI that we're seeing becoming more available and more accessible, we're beginning to see this turn towards technology again. So that's one of the ways that they're doing so effectively. The second way is through utilizing data. They're implementing it at the right time, at the right place, based on specific needs, and they're monitoring and adjusting as they go. So when they're utilizing these technologies, they're checking themselves. They're also identifying, hey, if we implement it here versus here, we're able to change our outcomes. And that really comes down to the third piece of that, which is being mindful to comfort and confidence in the technology. Not all of your users are going to be comfortable utilizing that technology. Not all of them are going to have the confidence to utilize it. But it's more so than just the users and the learners. It's your facilitators, it's your implementers, it's your organization and your stakeholders, and even your community and industry. Everyone has to be at a balanced level of comfort and confidence in the technology in order for it to be effective.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's interesting to hear these three types of learning approaches and how technology can help in all of them. But I guess using this kind of technology could also be a little challenging at first for people to get used to it, especially AI and the automation that we are talking about. Have you seen any positive outcomes come with technology? Have you used that before with, say, the advanced learning part?
Yeah, for sure. So I do a lot with AI and AI learning, helping teams to kind of get comfortable and confident utilizing it. A lot of times where I'm seeing the most success is when L&D professionals model the change that they want to see in that advanced learning. So a lot of times they're utilizing it for their daily tasks that they can automate that don't require another human. And then they're showing the use, the need, the benefit to their stakeholders in order to kind of create this pyramid of comfort, if you will. So, you start kind of with the stakeholders, kind of set that foundation and say, hey, look, this is okay to use. This is how we're utilizing it. Here's how we're secure. Here's how we're ethical. Here's what we're doing with it. Would you like to try it too? I think this could save your work-life balance. And then you build it up from there until you get to the user who may need to utilize it for advanced learning in order to, reduce costs, to mitigate risk, or even increase revenue.
Oh, sounds interesting. Sounds really fascinating. You did highlight some really nuanced challenges over there when it comes to these professionals using technologies at advanced level of learning. But speaking of challenges, let's talk about how we are actually creating this learning content for the corporate learning or for the employees. So content is king, they say, but in learning and development, I think content is more like the entire kingdom right now, isn't it? Like with the speed of
Mhm.
change in today's business world. So how are you and your team thinking about creating this learning content and experiences that aren't just going to tick any boxes, but they are going to be genuinely going to grow your employees and put them on a career growth trajectory, and they can actually engage with it?
Yeah, so there's a lot to be said, especially I think you're hitting on more so kind of that continuous learning piece of that. So when we talk about continuous learning and something that's not going to be just a check the box on the formal requirements, it's important to keep in mind that no matter what, people are always going to be learning. A brain does not just shut off, stop taking in information unless you're in a coma or some kind of altered state of mind. But the key is you need to shape or guide this learning into the right direction. And that kind of gets into the concept of behavioral economics, but we're not going to dive too deep into that. So let's focus on what you asked on how it's been working out here and maybe what my team is doing. So if we want a behavior like learning to become a habit or to become continuous, we often first look at the environment in which the learner is learning in, or the framework that the learner is working within, to make sure that users are drawn to and choosing this freely. We call it freedom within a framework. So the framework can be the formal training requirements. Let's say, you've got to have, an hour of training. We know that it's got to check these boxes in there, but it doesn't oftentimes talk about how they have to learn that. So when we look at this through the lens of content design, we still have jobs to do. We've got to get our training done, and these should not have to cause a stop to any processes, because otherwise people are going to be like, oh man, I got to take an hour out of work. I'm going to come back. I'm going to be behind. And then I got to do this training, and it becomes something in which they dread. And we want to find ways around that and to kind of integrate the content design into maybe existing processes. So what does that look like? Well, the first one is microlearning and accessibility. So we do a lot with users that are doing the process or learning about the process to place the content before, during, or after to check for comprehension and meet some sort of training requirements. So for example, we had a call center that had to sign off on acknowledgements of HIPAA requirements. And the formal training requirements, obviously said it had to be an hour. So we had them do small 10-minute e-learnings before getting on the phones, provided them with a resource, which was just a one-page script next to their desk. And then they were on a software called Steps Recorder to track the time spent at which they started each call, had to verify the caller's answers through the HIPAA verification questions each time, and then submitted into the LMS for a total of 45 minutes. At the end of the day, they took a 5-minute quiz. All calls were recorded, and that's how we got our hour of training in. for that. So it didn't cause a stop to process. Let's pull everyone into a classroom. Let's have them learn this information there. We actually just layered the training directly onto the processes that were already existing to create what we call an integrated training approach instead of an interventive training approach.
That is very interesting. So it was more like a very personalized approach for these employees, looking at, the processes that they go through, and you didn't want them to take some extra time out in order to actually do the training. It was just happening as they were doing the jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then it was a copy and paste over to other roles. We just identified what are the processes that this role already does, or what's their environment that they're learning in. And then how can we just layer our training on top of it and track it for, the check the box.
I mean, these integration approaches are like super important, and they seem to be working
Very
for
well.
you're doing. Yeah, seem to be working very well. So it makes me think more about the role of leaders in actually making these approaches happen. So like,
Mm-hmm.
like managers are kind of the unsung heroes of learning and development. Uh, they are the ones who actually translate that organizational strategy into day-to-day growth for employees. So from your perspective, how can we transform these managers from just being passive organizers of training to actually active champions for, say, continuous learning?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting one because we know that managers play a really pivotal role in employee development. They obviously, like you said, they serve as coaches, they serve as mentors, they serve as advocates, but we need them to serve that not only for their employees, but for their employees' learning. So they really need to bridge the gap between the organizational goals and the individual growth, like ensuring that the development efforts really align together there. So managers can really effectively contribute to L&D and support them by helping us to identify learning needs, provide ongoing feedback. Obviously, as we said, act as coaches and mentors and fostering that learning culture. But how do we get them to align to that? And how does that happen? Well, there's a lot of different things that we can do. Is one, there's so much on a manager's plate already that they already have to do that oftentimes this is not what they're thinking of. But if you have the right people in the right seats on the bus, if you will, doing the right things, this is something that should happen very naturally. So how can L&D professionals really equip managers for this? Well, they can provide training specifically to the managers, because if you take care of that manager will then in turn see the benefit and take care of their employees. Resources are always, important. Enabling social learning. I think one of the best ways that L&D professionals can really help these managers is to utilize kind of a shadow program. A lot of times people will not see the benefit in something or want to listen until they know how much you care and see and understand what they do on a daily basis. So don't underestimate the impact of shadowing, of saying, hey, instead of, can you come here and meet with me for, an hour? How about, can I come shadow a couple of your meetings? Can I better understand what your team experiences on a day-to-day? Can I go to you? And then maybe we can just debrief afterwards to talk about the learning needs and to really get specific for you and your team and what they need. Because if they feel like there's something in it for them, they're going to advocate more for what they need and what they want.
So I mean, it definitely starts with one person and changing the entire company culture. So yeah, that's a really good perspective on leadership as well, that it's supposed to be the manager who's supposed to, take that initiative, shadow some teams, see what they're actually doing, what kind of trainings do they actually require to go to that next level, and then advocate that into a strategy. That's great.
Yeah. I mean, people learn by seeing, observing, doing. So if your L&D professionals can model the behavior that you want to see within your leadership first, a lot of times that will catch on very quickly.
All right, that's a really good, a very powerful perspective on leadership. And speaking of powerful transformations, let's talk about the elephant in the room. It's there in every other field now, and it's AI. So it seems like every conversation, even in marketing, AI is there in marketing as well. So it seems like every other conversation in learning and development these days eventually circles back to the AI. But
Mhm.
I'm curious about your perspective on it, because since you know so much about AI and you have written two books about it, beyond the hype, how do you see AI genuinely transforming this learning landscape, that creates real value for both the employees as well as the organization?
Yeah, so and that's such a great topic to talk about. One of my favorites to talk about. AI is here to stay. We know this. And it really is already transforming everything that we do. And in a lot of ways, you may not even recognize it as it's doing so. AI is not really new to the market. It's something that we've had for quite a while, that's just been a little more under wraps or less accessible. And AI, when it comes to learning, a lot of times people feel like, oh no, AI is going to take my job, or they feel scared, or they feel unconfident in the technology. And I ask them to remember when the cloud first came into play. We saw, the Microsoft cloud or the Azure cloud or all of these different cloud-based systems, and it was the same kind of fear of, is it safe to use? Is there security? Am I going to lose everything? And we're seeing that cycle happen again through AI. Nowadays, you don't even think about the cloud, right?
Yeah.
So I predict that AI is going to be very similar in the sense that you're not even going to think about the AI. Now, when it comes to the role of AI in adaptive learning and within the corporate training space, it's going to provide so many benefits once people are comfortable and confident with the technology. So what kind of benefits do we see? We see personalization at scale, which means AI is able to analyze individual learning patterns, preferences, performances. You could train it to do what you need it to do. And ultimately, the impact of that is your employees, yourself, you're going to be able to create custom tailored content to their needs at a breakneck speed. So that's really going to optimize the engagement. It's going to optimize the retention. It's going to save your work-life balance and your brain for the really important things, which is also, one of the greatest benefits to AI is the automation of everything. When we talk about that, you can begin to identify what are the tasks that I have to do over and over and over and over again, or what is the data I need to analyze over and over and over and over again. There are going to be bots, there's going to be AI, there's going to be ways in which this technology can do that faster for you, and then you become the double check. We're talking about like people being able to get real-time feedback and guidance. So when there's quote unquote no time for training or no time for learning, well, you would have gotten up and asked a person this question. Instead of taking up your time and their time, you can take your time and an AI's time to check and ask the question. Now, that being said, AI is created by humans. It is trained by humans. It may have some human responses. So just as much as you might trust a coworker's response, you may want to ask the AI the same questions you would to check that. Like, hey, what are your sources? Where are you getting this information from? It's the same thing when we talk about the ethics of AI. It's just like you and I keep each other in check on our ethics. You're probably going to have to do the same thing here.
Yeah.
When I'm utilizing AI, I literally use it as if it's another person in the room, as someone that I can utilize as a resource in order to help me do these things faster. So your team of one, your team of two just became a team of four, just became a team of, however many people you have, clone them by one. And that's how you can work and operate within AI. So beyond, the work-life balance there, let's talk about some of the great things it's doing for individuals when it comes to the virtual coaching, when it comes to things like the enhanced data analytics, when it comes to even scenario-based learning situations and simulations. There's a lot of AI out there that can not only create some of these experiences for users, but also for your facilitators, your stakeholders, your organization as a whole. This predictive analysis piece of it is going to really begin to develop as it gains exposure and experience to what's happening here in the real world, just like a human learns.
Right. Have you used AI till now in any of your organizations, and what kind of outcomes you have seen?
Almost all of them. Almost all of them. So we we used to have a fun nickname for one of the learning and development teams I was helping to set up. They were called the Dream Team. It was just a small team of 4 that started as a team of 1 and began to grow from there. But we were able to take regular everyday processes. We went back to utilizing the ADDIE model because we had enough time to do it through the use of AI, and give out these near perfect kind of training experiences, just because we were able to speed up our processes so much. And you guys know how much organizations are changing and moving. It's like the second you put content out there, it's almost out of date and you have to update again.
Yeah.
Well, with the use of AI, and what we were doing is we were doing a constant analysis on changes through bills that were going through Congress, actually, so that we could stay one step ahead of those changes. And we had the changes ready, set, and able to present prior to the change actually happening through the use of AI. So it kept us incredibly dynamic and incredibly fast at what we were doing. Additionally to that, we were also then able to utilize it within our social learning interactions. We had set up this kind of internal Google, if you will, for the company. And that
Okay.
was partially powered through AI. But within that, employees, as they were utilizing this resource, could go in and ask these questions. And not only would the AI help to then answer the questions in real time, it would also track what questions were coming in. And as it was tracking which questions were coming in, it was then giving us data as to, hey, this might need to be your next training, or, ooh, we might have someone that's out of compliance within this. Go in and check, you know? So it basically gave us eyes, ears on the ground as to where we needed to be and why we needed to be there.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a great use case. That's almost like it's doing the work of a manager shadowing the entire organization, what's required going forward. That's amazing. And
It's
that's what
fun.
AI can do, right? Yeah. It's like a 24-hour, 7 days a week worker for you.
Yeah. You know, and that was the biggest piece of it. For these L&D professionals, a lot of times we're seeing so much burnout in this field. And that AI really helped to maximize the sustainability of work-life balance, because we all run lean. We all run incredibly lean. So the utilization of the technology helps to save their brains for the really important work.
Right. That's great. Uh, in terms of I mean, you've been through so many organizations now where you have actually proven as a great leader in people development and the growth of the employees as well. But in terms of actually showing the business outcomes of your training, how does one go through that? I mean, how does an L&D leader start thinking, okay, how can I actually prove that my trainings are having this kind of effect or this kind of impact on the organization? How do you actually explain that as a process?
Yeah, so ROI, right? ROI is a big topic that stands for return on investment. And when it comes to measuring impact, you need to understand the organizational goals and what's important to the organization. If you can't identify, hey, what are the main goals of the organization, then you have to kind of fall back on what we know as training individuals, which is training's main purpose is to mitigate risk, reduce cost, and increase efficiency or increase revenue, right? So those are the 3 you can always fall back on for your ROI. So how do you do that? Let's talk about mitigating risk first. When we talk about mitigating risk, you need to have some sort of starting data set or some kind of problem that you're solving for. And oftentimes you got to align with the organizational goals to understand what that is. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you have slips, trips, and falls that are causing workers' compensation claims like crazy. You need to understand what is the current claim percentage, what are the slips and trips and falls being caused by, and then from there, how can training impact that? Now, I'm going to say something that I hope is not revolutionary in any way, shape, or form, but training is not going to solve every problem,
Yeah.
right? We oftentimes training is a scapegoat of, oh man, if we just had training on this, then we would be 100% on it. Well, that's possible. That's possible. But how many times have you gone in, you've created training, and you're like, why didn't this solve the problem? They have everything they need.
Yeah.
Well, in my one book, Training Integration Over Intervention, I talk about the 3 Ps. And the 3 Ps are people, process, and product. And when we look at measuring ROI and the effectiveness of training, that's such a small portion to the total organizational goal. First of all, they got to have the right people in place. You got to have a good starting line at which these people can actually be trained to be successful, right? And if they're not the right person, they don't have the right soft skills, they don't have the right hard skills to do the job, they will never be successful in this, no matter how much training you give them. They have to be willing, ready, able to learn what you need to teach them. Second piece of that is process, right? How do you get from point A to point B successfully? If you got to go to point A and then around maybe like R, S, whatever, and then back to A and then over to B, you may not have a good process. And you can train that all day long, but if you're still putting Band-Aids on your process, that training is not going to be effective. The other side to that is product. And product is often the tools that they need in order to complete the process. So if they don't have a working computer, if they don't have Wi-Fi, if they don't have, let's say maybe their space bar on their keyboard doesn't work, doesn't matter what you're training, they're going to be frustrated. They're going to hate their job. They're not going to want to do it because they are not set up for success. So I go back to that framework there. When you're measuring your ROI and when you are talking about the impacts that training has on the organization, you need to make sure that the people, the processes, and the product, or the 3 Ps, are set up in place in order for your measurements to be effective. And that really needs to be a part of your measurements as a business partner, as a learning advisor, as someone who is going to impact the business. You can also talk about how it's impacting those 3 things. How is it impacting the people? How is it impacting the process? How is it impacting the products and the technology stack that you're currently utilizing? Measure your ROI based on that kind of triangle of framework there, and then identify what you're measuring. Maybe it's turnover, maybe it's efficiency, maybe it's mitigating risk, maybe it's increasing revenue, maybe it's reducing cost in some way based on those 3 things.
That's a great insight because this is such a hot topic right now. How do you actually measure the ROI of your training? And every L&D leader or a training leader who has to justify that to the management or the stakeholders for what they're actually doing, this is a really useful framework. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
And your first question should always be, well, what do you want to measure?
Yeah.
What do you want it to impact? And if you don't have that answered, don't start on your impact. Don't start on your training program. You need to know what you're solving for prior to ever creating.
Absolutely. That's fantastic insight, Jenessa. So we have covered so much ground today about the world of learning and development. Before we wrap up, if you could leave our viewers with one key insight or like a piece of advice that you would like to give them about the future of corporate learning, what would that be?
Be dynamic, I would say. I would say the one thing that is what I see the most challenge with for the individuals that truly want to be successful in learning and development and constantly hit this roadblock of if they would just listen to me, I would be able to help. Take a moment, take a step back, and understand how you can be more dynamic. What does that mean? So when I say be more dynamic, how are you able to model changing, molding, shifting, moving so they can see what that looks like and then begin to repeat that back to you? A lot of times you need to model that behavior of being able to change your mind, being able to say yes, being able to show them how to move and change so that they can move and change. So learning to be dynamic is one of the best ways to be successful in this field.
Yeah, that's a great insight at the very end, Jenessa. Thanks for that. Uh, and that just means be dynamic in this framework that you put in, and that's the key to success over here. So that brings us to the end of another enlightening episode of Training Transformers. My sincere thanks to Jenessa here for sharing her very valuable insights and experiences with us today. To our viewers, if you found value in today's discussion, please make sure to follow us for more conversations with training leaders who are shaping the future workplace learning. You can find more additional resources and information about today's topic on Kitabu's website, that's kitabu.com. Join us next time as we continue to explore the transformative power of modern learning and development. Until then, keep innovating and transforming your training. I'm Tejas, and this has been Training Transformers.